speaker is Lindsey, who is the convener of the Stop the War Coalition.
Right, okay, thank you. Thank you, Joe, and thanks. It's so good to see so many people here today. And can I just say how good it is to see so many sisters here, because that isn't always the case at meetings, and I always think it makes for a better meeting when there are so many. No offence to any of the men in the room, but I hope people will know what I mean. A lot of what Anas has said really is exactly what I would have said, but I won't sit down for a few minutes yet. I'll try and think of some other things. Anas and I have been working together now for, I think, 7 or 8 years, since the massacre in Jenin. I don't know if people remember it, some of you may not remember it, in 2002, when he and his organisation organised a very big demonstration, mainly of Muslims, I think I'm right in saying, and then we decided that Stop the War and the Muslim Association of Britain would come together in a big demonstration against the war in Iraq and for freedom for the Palestinians. Now, that was highly successful. We then went on to have 2 million people on the streets in February 2003, and since then we've had dozens and dozens of demonstrations. And the importance of that, I think, is twofold. The first is that it has been incredibly important in this country that Muslims and non-Muslims have organised politically together. I can't stress it enough, because when you now hear the people around Europe who say that Islam has nothing to do with Europe, that it's an alien culture to Europe, lots of them who say Muslims shouldn't be here, that they should go back to wherever their own countries are supposed to be, although many of them were born in Europe and their parents and grandparents were born in Europe. When you hear people say this, it is so important that we can say, as a movement, that we are a united movement. United against racism, united against Islamophobia, and united over one simple thing. We do not agree with what our government is doing in Iraq, in Afghanistan, its support for the Israelis in Palestine, and the other things that it has been responsible for. Anas has talked about 9/11, and that leads me to the second point, which is is that this has been a war which has now gone on for 9 years. Almost exactly 9 years, when George Bush and Tony Blair launched the invasion of Afghanistan. We were told by December 2001 that this war was over, that it was conclusively won. The Taliban had been defeated, Mullah Omar had escaped on a motorbike, which is quite a feat when you think of the American surveillance and everything else they're supposed to have. But anyway, he managed to do it, but nonetheless they had declared victory. In fact, John Simpson, who at the time was the correspondent for the BBC following the war, went into Kabul on a tank, declaring peace and freedom for the people of Afghans on behalf of the BBC. I'm sure they were very, very grateful. Now, since then, this war has deteriorated beyond belief. In the first 5 years of the war in Afghanistan, 7 British soldiers died. Most of them died in accidents, actually, in car accidents and helicopter accidents and so on. Since then, since 2006, more than 338, I think is the latest figure, British soldiers have died. This last year was the worst year for the NATO forces, for casualties of dead and seriously injured, than at any time since this war began. Joe Glenton, who spoke earlier, is one of the brave soldiers, one of the very few brave soldiers who is courageous enough to speak out. But we know that many of the soldiers in Afghanistan, and particularly their families, are bitterly opposed to this war. I had a letter today in Stop the War from a woman in a town in the Midlands whose son is in Afghanistan. She said she went to her MP and said, I'm against this war, why are you supporting it? He said, oh, I listen, you're just a small minority, the silent majority are in favour of this war. So she went and asked every single one of her neighbours and friends and workmates, are you in favour of the war in Afghanistan? Every single one of them said no. And so she said, I want to organise a petition of 7,000 people, which will be a majority of those who voted for him in the last election, I want to organise 7,000 people to say that we are against the war, and perhaps he'll realise then that we're the majority. Now, she is absolutely right, and that is the mother of a serving soldier in Afghanistan. She's absolutely right, and actually our politicians are an absolute disgrace. There was a vote in Parliament last month, a debate in Parliament, where how many out of 640 or 650 MPs, how many voted against continuing the war in Afghanistan? A miserable 16 of them voted against continuing the war. 300 of them didn't bother to vote at all, so we don't know what they think, but we can guess they're not that bothered about the situation because they can't even bother to go and sit in the warm, cosy Palace of Westminster and vote. I mean, it's not the most difficult job you'd have to do. It's not like going down a coal mine or something like that. But they couldn't even do that. Now, that's bad enough, but when you look at the opinion polls and you find that nearly 80% of people in this country are against the war in Afghanistan and want the troops out by the end of the year, it's not only a disgrace that they couldn't be bothered to go and vote, it's a disgrace that they will not listen to opinion in this country. We are told all the time opinion matters over all these kind of things, but when it comes down to it, they are not prepared to stand up and agree with what people are saying. Now, Anna's referred to the question of what the coalition government is doing to public spending in this country, and I believe these issues are connected. I believe that actually the people like Liam Fox, you might know this actually, Liam Fox has said we can't cut defence spending. MI5 have said please only cut security spending by 10% because we've got to capture all these Islamic terrorists, and the police have said don't cut our spending either because we've got to police all these demonstrations when everybody campaigns and comes out against the cuts. Now, my answer to that is the things we shouldn't be cutting is expenditure on the poor, is expenditure on the sick, is expenditure on the people who are old. Those are the people we should be protecting in our society, and we are attacking those people here, and at the same time we're going to Afghanistan and using the money that is spent on bombs to bomb the women and the children and the old people and the wedding parties in that country. Now, what kind of a society is this? What kind of values do we have that we have to cut child benefit? And they've also said they don't want poor people living on benefits in central London. They obviously want to send us all out to camps by the M25 and then we can come in and work for them every day and go out, not allowed to live anywhere in inner London. That's what they're saying to people. What kind of a society is this? And therefore this is about this campaign to stop the war in Afghanistan, to get the troops out, is of vital importance, but it's also part of a wider campaign for social justice. We can no longer live in a country where the rich get richer, where racism and Islamophobia are commonplace now on our streets, and where people are expected to put up with anything, even though the vast majority of them don't agree with it. Ed Miliband was elected leader of the Labour Party last week. I know that in some quarters like the Daily Telegraph they think the Russian Revolution's round the corner, but I don't think they have much to fear from Ed Miliband. But he did say one very good thing in his speech. He said the war in Iraq was wrong. This sent all the supporters of Tony Blair absolutely mad. But he was quite, it's only taken him 7 years and 2 million people on the streets to reach this conclusion, but better late than never. But the problem is, he still says the war in Afghanistan is right. Our job is to say to these politicians, you are wrong and we are right, we have to get the troops out, otherwise we are going to suffer more Islamophobia, because Islamophobia has been massively exacerbated by the war on terror. We will suffer more poverty because money will be spent on war and not on education and health. That is what we are doing, so I'd like to ask you all to hold your politicians to account, to go and demonstrate outside them, to lobby them, to actually make it absolutely clear to them where people in Tower Hamlets really stand over the question of the war. I'd also like you to take action and get out on the streets. Get out on the streets locally, but make sure whatever you do, take the leaflets at the back, be there on November the 20th. We are going to have a big demonstration through the heart of central London, ending in Trafalgar Square. We'll all be, and so all the different people here will be mobilising to make that a success. Make sure you're part of it and make sure the government cannot miss the anger and opposition to this war there is in this country.
Well done.